Oliver Stone's controversial 1994 satire, Natural Born Killers, has endured through the decades and is widely regarded today as a masterpiece by many, including myself. As much as I would have liked to have seen the version Quentin Tarantino originally wrote, I honestly believe that Oliver Stone made the best possible version of Quentin's heavily rewritten story at the time the film was made. The closest the film comes to feeling like a Quentin Tarantino product comes right at the beginning. The opening scene is set in a diner, not unlike those seen in 1991's Reservoir Dogs and 1994's Pulp Fiction. But as soon as Oliver Stone plays his first camera trick, any trace of Quentin Tarantino leaves the film, and for the better in my opinion. In the words of Oliver Stone himself, he approached Natural Born Killers like a child, throwing paint at a blank canvas to express how they were feeling in that moment. The result, he knew and accepted, would be messy, but it would still be an artistic statement. And while some feel that Stone should not have used Quentin Tarantino's script as the basis for this experiment, he really could not have picked a better story with which to make the statements he wanted to make. Disgusted with the hypocritical media and how it effectively desensitized the very generation of people it would demonize and glamorize in equal measure, Stone set out to make a film which not only presented itself like a 2-hour channel surfing session, albeit one with an actual narrative structure, but also asked the media itself to take responsibility for both the actions of the film's characters and the effect such a film would have on audiences regardless of whether they loved it or hated it. Oliver Stone never set out to make a film which would inspire criminal behavior. He set out to point the very finger of blame back at those who used the visual medium to scapegoat every youth culture which has defined each successive generation over the decades. A generation conditioned to embrace a particular political agenda while at the same time being exposed to the sexualized and aggressive television product. A product dominated by capitalism. A product which demands the younger viewers to buy the latest fashion in order to avoid being deemed uncool by their peers. And a product which demands their parents to buy them the toys based off the latest films, even if these are violent action or horror films from which the toy shall include plastic shooting and slashing weapons. The sexualization of the music industry, and in particular the teen idols of the day, which sell as many records to adults as they do teenagers. But what of the kids whose parents cannot afford such luxuries, or worse, the kids whose parents would rather beat the living shit out of them than buy them anything which might make them feel loved, and in return feel the need to return love, or even know how to love? It's these neglected members of Generation X whom Oliver Stone focuses on in Natural Born Killers, and while he never makes it seem like he condones their murderous actions, he does make it clear that he feels some sympathy towards them based on their upbringing alone. And while it would be simple to blame the parents for not caring about their children, he instead sees the media as equal contributors to the notorious criminals they've become. And while the media are to blame for desensitizing and dehumanizing these kids, they're even more to blame for their glamorization now these kids have not only grown up, but also become recognized worldwide as icons of their generation. There is a fine line between art and the television screen from which that art is presented. On its own, art is subjective to the observer/listener. But when it's presented through a television screen, it runs the risk of being misrepresented by the powers that be. This is done to ensure sales and, most of all, ratings. And while marketing is a vital part of any artist enjoying a successful career, mismarketing all too often plays a bigger role in making or breaking an artist, depending on whether they're cooperative with the powers that be or not. The same can be said of art which goes against the agenda politicians push through the television screen via the visual trickery of their media puppets. In the case of Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers, it was the latter which led to the film being both dismissed and or demonized before it even reached theaters, and when the film finally did land, it was the cinematic equivalent of a criminal act in the eyes of many. But in my opinion, what is really equivalent to a criminal act in the art world is accusing a piece of art, in this case a film, of being amoral, without having watched the fucking thing. And yes, this was true of many of its biggest critics. The few that did take the time to watch the film were fueled by their own deep-rooted political ideals, which I might add were all sold to them in some form or another by the media or by their parents via the media at some point in their lives. The many who did not watch the film yet went out of their way to attack Oliver Stone as an instigator of violence had no fucking right whatsoever to pass comment or judgment on the filmmaker nor his film, Their own ignorance outed them as unreliable critics, but Oliver Stone still had to defend himself, both as a filmmaker and as a human being, for many years after the film's release. To capture the feel of television as opposed to cinema, Oliver Stone utilizes just about every camera format known to man, though for all of its visual ambitions and accomplishments, the film still manages to remain as purely cinematic as anything Stone did earlier in his career. The frequent edits and cross-cutting may overwhelm some, as too will the irregular transitions between Technicolor and black and white. Each of these serves a purpose, however, and is not merely thrown in for the sake of standing out from every other film made before it, or since for that matter. Sometimes we are shown characters' innermost thoughts, other times subliminal messages appear right before our eyes. There is even an entire scene set within a television sitcom starring the main characters. This only hammers home Oliver Stone's intention to ridicule not only the media marketing machine, but also the casual misogyny which is sold as comedy to the masses. And in keeping with the feel of watching television itself, brief commercials come and go, some of which are included as part of the storytelling. The satire itself veers wildly from sly to subtle to straight up in your face, adding even more layers to an already challenging viewing experience. And this is where repeat viewings will reap the greatest rewards. But to quote a character in the film, this is very much an acquired taste. The fact that this line is one of the very first spoken in the entire film tells the viewers from the outset what they're about to experience. Whether Oliver Stone intended that line to take on such a meaning is a mystery, but when one has watched Natural Born Killers as many times as I have, an acquired taste cannot help but stand out as a line which sums up the film Oliver Stone has made. Not necessarily because of the subject matter, but more because of Stone's decision to depict that subject matter in the manner he does. The characters throughout are stereotypical, because that's how the media works. Some characters are pure caricatures, but such exaggerations are again very true of how the media chooses to present the people it allows us to listen to. Whether it be celebrities on talk shows or civilians on game shows, everybody is made up for the cameras before being beamed out for the viewing pleasure of the public. Oliver Stone even makes light of this during the film itself. The most blatant and, in my opinion, brilliant moment in which Oliver Stone parodies television is during an interview between one of our natural born killers of the title and a spineless, self-absorbed reporter. This interview takes place in a prison setting, which remarkably was actually a real prison Oliver Stone insisted on using for authenticity, and it very closely mimics the real-life interview between convicted cult leader Charles Manson and Geraldo Rivera. This scene is where the interviewee refers to himself as a natural-born killer at the conclusion of a Manson-esque monologue about the very act of murder. The fact that this sleazeball reporter is ecstatic, orgasmic even at this moment, exposes the very hypocrisy at the heart of the media, and the fact that Stone manages to do this through a single character, superbly played by Robert Downey Jr., is a testament to his skill as a filmmaker. And speaking of the cast, all the main players are excellent across the board, with Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis leading the way. Both are utterly convincing, and in an ironic way, it is these two murderers who display the most humanity of anyone during the entire film. They are both morally reprehensible and as ruthless as mass murderers can be, but deep down these two feel a genuine affection for one another. It may be due to both having come from abusive upbringings, and while their unfortunate backgrounds don't make anything they do as adults in any way right, it does remain Oliver Stone's focus throughout. This is more about him making a statement on the media's generalization of a forgotten generation. Elsewhere in the cast, Robert Downey Jr. sports a hilariously exaggerated Australian accent as the aforementioned reporter. The late Tom Sizemore is a walking vat of volatile energy hiding behind a police badge. And rounding out the main trio is Tommy Lee Jones, who goes as wildly over the top as he later would in Batman Forever. All three of these actors give their all, even though they're very deliberately playing caricatures. Sizemore's celebrity cop is clearly a scumbag behind his media-projected bravado, while Jones' right-wing prison warden is as thinly ridden as the toothbrush mustache he wears, but as loathsome as they both are. It's Downey Jr. as the face and the voice of the media who has the biggest target on his chest in Stone's eyes, and it's giving nothing away to say that in the end he gets exactly what he deserves. In a sick way, however, it's probably his greatest moment as a media muppet. Overall, the characters in Natural Born Killers really aren't that important. That is not a criticism. What I mean by that is, you have to remember that the film Oliver Stone was making was intended to satirize the media, and part of doing that is to render his characters as mere puppets to pull the viewers in as he pulls their strings. From Wayne Gale to Jack Scagnetti, to just about every other character we get to know by name, they're all very much what we'd expect them to be from the moment we first meet them. Why? Because we've seen them and their kind so many times already on television. Even our Natural Born Killers are puppets in Stone's experiment. Mickey and Mallory Knox are exactly the kind of typical trailer trash couple the media would depict when it came time to discuss American poverty. It should also be noted that there are very few ethnic minorities seen throughout the film. In fact, the most memorable of the few glimpses comes right at the very end during one final channel surf before the end credits roll. The person in question? O.J. Simpson, and it is actual coverage from his trial for murder, which he would end up winning. Why O.J.? He may not have been convicted, but this man was clearly guilty of a crime. But since he boosts ratings, he was deemed an acceptable representation of an ethnic minority. As for the others we are shown, they're all real-life prison inmates. If at this point you're in any doubt of what Oliver Stone set out to make with Natural Born Killers, you're either too blind, choose to be blind, or you're just too fucking stupid to be watching this film. And Natural Born Killers really could not have ended any better. Not only does it stand as a satirical exploration of the media-enforced connection of American pop culture and American true crime from both the mid-90s period which the film will emerge, as well as the decade which preceded it, but the film also anticipates just how far the media will go to sensationalize those very same things in order to draw ratings. And of course with ratings comes power. The power to persuade a significant portion of the population that artworks such as Natural Born Killers were to blame for the degenerate behavior of American youth. And without moral action being taken against artists like Oliver Stone, the destructive influences of their work threaten to spread beyond the USA and engulf the entire globe. It's very much a game of hook, line and sinker the media plays, and Oliver Stone has both the brains and the balls to use his own commercial tactics to craft a story which above all else exists purely to condemn them. On a final note, I'd like to highlight the soundtrack which was produced by Trent Reznor. This was to be Reznor's first of two soundtracks during the 90s for which he would undertake production duties. The second would be for David Lynch's Lost Highway. And although I love that soundtrack beyond words, Reznor's earlier production is arguably the more impressive. Not only in terms of just how many artists he's able to bring together, but also in how he splices them all into one continuous flow on the official soundtrack release. The gloomy croons of Leonard Cohen sit comfortably alongside the grungy angst of Al 7. Elsewhere, the gangster rap of Dr. Dre and the punk rock of Patti Smith feature, while artists as diverse as Peter Gabriel, the Shangri-Las, Bob Dylan, Marilyn Manson, Cowboy Junkies, Patsy Cline, Dwayne Eddy, Jane's Addiction, the film's star Juliette Lewis, and Trent Reznor's own Nine Inch Nails round out one of the most creative soundtracks ever conceived and compiled. Reznor succeeds in delivering an experience which plays like the audio equivalent of the visual product itself, and few film soundtracks have ever managed or even attempted to be anything more than a loose collection of songs heard throughout the film. Natural Born Killers was a snapshot of the 90s, yet it remains as relevant today even though it depicted a period where social media and the internet in general were not as prevalent as they are today. And while I will always herald this film as a masterpiece, I will also admit that it does seem to have been hijacked by the misguided more and more over the years. This film is not meant to be a celebration of criminal behavior, rather a condemnation of the media who repackaged it for mass consumption and more importantly ratings. There are the obvious political correctness champions who are always going to hate this film, yet there are those who love it as some kind of a romance without ever paying attention to what the script is saying about them as much as it is the media. They're the easily manipulated, not to mention the rather moronic, celebrity-worshipping media junkies who are as much to blame for the tactics of the media as the media itself. This is a far smarter film than most give it credit for, and for all the misinterpretations and misrepresentations, Natural Born Killers still holds up today as one of the most important films ever made.